So we're very excited to have Steve Poeppe here. Steve's the Senior Director of Tanium's Government Healthcare and Education Practice. He spent 12 years in your role working in the public sector, beginning with an 8-year stint as the System Security Officer for the Superior Court of Arizona. He later spent 4 years as a Deputy CISO for the state of Idaho. And he has since moved to the private sector, holding various positions at McAfee, Intel, RSA, and he's currently the Senior Director for Government Healthcare and Education at Tanium. Today, he's going to share that perspective with you as he looks forward to the IT tools of the future. Without any further ado, please welcome to the stage, Steve Poeppe.
So this picture, this was given to me almost 20 years ago on my 21st birthday by my stepfather. He had no idea what career I was heading down. But I don't think if he sees this now, and I'm sure he will, he'll just be blown away by what this represents and how my career has gone down this path. So this is what I do. We're up early in the morning. We're searching in the dark, trying to find that worm, that proverbial worm, right? We're using a tool here that's pretty antiquated. The one problem with this picture, though, is that we all know that apples don't get worms, right? So it would look kind of silly having a bird with a flashlight aimed in a window, but this is how it works. So on the back side of this, he wrote this note to me, and it says, "It's not enough to find and point out the worm hole in the apple. You've got to get rid of the worm, and then you may take a bite if you wish." This is the problem with IT tools today. There are so many vendors out there who are able to point at the wormhole and say, hey, there it is. But when it comes time to actually remediate or fix something across a large spectrum, let's say a global company, or even here within the state, you've got hundreds of thousands of computers. How is it that you're able to, one, detect that across this massive infrastructure, and then take action on it in a time that's meaningful and relevant? We're spending $125 billion a year on data and analytics to try and figure out better ways to do these things. So looking at better processes. Think of that number, and we can't even answer the basic simple questions of how many computers are on my network. I worked with like Fortune 100 companies, and we ask them this question. It's a real simple question. How many computers on your network? We get some really crazy answers like, well, somewhere between 200 and 250,000. So you've got a 50,000 computer delta between what you think you have and what might exist. How do you secure that kind of environment when you can't even count the number of computers you have? The current tools, the legacy tools that we have, simply don't scale with the kind of growth that we're experiencing right now. PK did a great job this morning of talking about that, and I touched on that a little bit too, is this explosion over the next 6 years of what's going to happen to IT with the Internet of Things. The endpoint is truly the problem. All of the major breaches in the last year or two have all been the result of something that could have been fixed way ahead of time. The Verizon breach report had a little sidebar that said 99.9% of the breaches, the vulnerabilities that were actually breached, were things that we knew about a year in advance, and we did nothing about it. So going back to my picture of the bird, and I think about that is I've been doing this 20 years. When I was offered my job in security originally, I worked for the Superior Court of Arizona, and the CIO calls me into his office, and he says, hey, we had an audit, and we have to have somebody to do security, a role of security. And this was back in 1998-ish. And I said, sounds kind of niche-y, this security thing, right? I mean, Microsoft's going to get this all figured out, and I'm going to be out of a job in 3 years. And he's like, no, don't worry about it. We'll take care of you. You can always have this job. So all right. So I took the job, and 20 years later, I'm still doing it, and I'm still fighting the same problems. Now I'm on the vendor side of the house, so it's a little different view, but the essence of, I don't know how many computers I have, and it's been 2 decades, and we still don't know these things. We can't deploy patches in time within a year's time frame to protect ourselves. That's a very low-cost thing that we should all be doing, right? These are discussions that I can't believe are still going on. And the reason that they're still going on is because the tools that we're using were built 2 decades ago when we only had a few thousand endpoints. So trying to scale those things out has not worked. What we've been doing this whole time is we've been adding on like additions to a house, right? We didn't just bulldoze the house and start over. We just added on some rooms and hoping that it would work. And PK touched on this. So it's not just this massive growth. The communication between all of these devices is just absurd, right? In the next 6 years, we're going to go from 3.7 billion to 25 billion devices. And most of this is due to virtualization, embedded devices, pretty much anything with a chip that can communicate. So, how do we deal with this kind of growth? We're trying to solve today's problems with yesterday's tools. So one of my asks of you is when you go out today and you talk to the vendors, if you haven't read this book yet, it's called The Hard Thing About Hard Things, and it's by Ben Horowitz. One of the things that he talks about is there a difference between a 10 and 20% jump in effectiveness of a tool or technology? What we really need to do is find something that's really going to get us out of the hole, and it has to be 100 to 1,000 times better than what we're already using. So when you visit with a vendor, say, what is it that you're doing that's going to make a dent in the universe, right? How are you going to save the state of California money? How are you going to prevent us from having our name tarnished? And how are you going to do that at scale? You guys are massive. You spend a lot of money, right? What's that implementation going to look like over 100,000 endpoints, right? How does that happen? What we're trying to do right now is utilize a toothpick to chisel away at a problem that is absolutely massive, and we're only touching the surface of it. So in order to get through this, we have to change how we think about and how we manage our endpoint infrastructure, because that is truly where the threat lies. There's if you're familiar with the Allen curve, I don't know if any of you have heard of this. So the Allen curve was developed in the 1970s, and it was about communication between engineers, and that after 30 feet of distance between engineers, the communication dropped to like half. In every environment that I see, it's not just a technology problem. It is also a people problem. We have security and operations. So you have the guys who are trying to secure it, who are separated from the guys who know, the systems management portion of it, right? The guys who should be patching it, the guys who are delivering software and updating software. So there's a guy named Brad Peterson, and he was the CIO over at Charles Schwab. And he said, when I was at Charles Schwab, our IT, our security and operations centers were totally separate in different buildings, right? So there's no communication going on there. But these parties have to communicate in order to resolve the problems that we see today. So when he became the CIO over at NASDAQ, the teams were also separate. They were on separate floors. So what he did is he moved them up to the same floor and had them communicate. And he said he's experiencing an amazing change in how these guys work. We now have any latency that you introduce into the system. So when you discover something, the time it takes you to then remediate it or resolve it, right? The breaches are on and off in 5 minutes. So when you introduce latency through teams that don't communicate well, this is only further exposing the state to possible data breach and massive loss. So to roll this up, this is not a sales deck. What it is it's a wake-up call to say there are very simple things that we should all be doing in order to support this going forward. I've been a security guy for almost 20 years. And looking at the problems that we have today, there's no way that we should be still experiencing these based on the sets of tools that are available. It's a matter of getting out there and saying, okay, who's going to make the big change and get me that 100 to 1,000% increase in productivity? So I really encourage you to go out and visit these vendors, stop by Tanium, and say, what are you guys doing that's going to really make a dent in the state of California? How are we going to dent the universe with your product? Thank you.